So tell me, what were you doing before becoming a relationship coach and a therapist? Would love to hear that.
So I went straight from art school to graduate school to become an art therapist. So I was always kind of headed in that direction. I got married and had a child, and I took time off of work to raise my child. And in that time, my marriage basically fell apart. And I just realized that my husband and I were better friends than we were lovers and partners. And so I had this kind of like come to God moment where it was sort of like, everything about who I was and my identity and everything I wanted to do was called into question. And so I sort of, for a few years, I took a job as kind of a glorified intake coordinator, working for a company called the Amen Clinics. And I ended up learning a lot about, it was a brain research and diagnostic facility. I ended up learning a lot about the brain and how it affects the way we show up in relationships. But I was really kind of flying below the radar. And I decided I wanted to be a romance writer. I was like, screw with being a therapist. I'm going to be a romance writer. And I actually wrote 5 award winning unpublished works in the realms of paranormal romance. And something would always happen, like an editor would pick it up, but then they'd leave their job, or something always happened, and I could never get something ultimately published. And so I was kind of spinning my wheels for a while. And then the Amen Clinics restructured and basically offered me a job as a therapist. And I was still like, no, I don't want to be a therapist, even though I had all the credentials. And so I decided that, and they weren't going to pay me very much. So I decided that the only way I can make money is if I become my own boss. I'm going to start my own practice. And never in my life did I want to be my own boss, never wanted to be in charge of my own money. But I was like, I have to do it. So I said, I gave myself 9 months. And I said, either I'm going to make it work in 9 months or I'm moving to Florida where it's a lot cheaper to live than Manhattan. And I'm just going to work in a bookstore for the rest of my life. So I gave myself 9 months. And in that time, I did manage to find a studio, an art studio where I could do my practice. And I was still sort of holding on to the dream of becoming a romance writer. And so I went to this conference in Chicago. And in the meantime, I had gone through a breakup with someone and a miscarriage with someone, which really rocked me to my core, emotionally speaking. And at the same time, 3 of my immediate family members were being confronted with chronic illnesses. And so there were all my attachments were really being called into question and disrupted on a lot of different levels. So there's all this stuff happening with me professionally speaking, and then there's all this stuff happening with me romantically, and then within my family structure. So I felt like I had this kind of like heart opening experience where I could either succumb to a kind of victim mentality or I could try to find grace on the other side of this experience. So I do what I always do when I'm confronted with things and I dive into it. So I started researching attachment and I started researching grief, and my education as a therapist guided me in those directions. And I just started writing about it. I'd write blog posts about it. And this was long before like YouTube or Twitter or any of those things really took off. It was like the first few years of YouTube's inception, really. And so I started writing about these things. Then I thought, well, 5 paranormal romance novels didn't get published, but maybe a book about grief would. And so I wrote a proposal for a contributed volume about grief, and I got several other practitioners to be willing to contribute to it. And within a week of submitting the proposal, the publisher was like, "Yes, we'll print it." And so I'm in an airport on my way to go to Chicago to give a presentation on a credible character conflict to an audience of romance writers. And I get a call from the publishing company saying they want to publish my book about grief. So I'm going to talk about love, and I'm getting published in the realms of grief. And so I go and I give my presentation about credible character conflict to the romance writers, and I got a standing ovation. And it was I call them universal winks. But that morning, the 3 other courses that were going on at the conference got canceled because it was like a big weather storm or something. They couldn't make it to the hotel. So I wound up having triple the amount of people in the room that were intended to be there. So I got a lot of exposure and I got a standing ovation for my presentation. And a woman comes up to me afterwards and she says, "Do you have an online course?" And a light bulb goes on over my head. And I said, "Not yet, but give me your email and I'll let you know when I do." And so I collected the emails of everyone in that conference room and I went home and I'm like, maybe this is a way to go rather than scrimping and scrape and saving and trying to figure out how to get more than 3 private clients on my caseload. Because remember, I've got 9 months to make this work. I put together that whole presentation I did that got the standing ovation. I turned it into an online course. I just duct taped things I could learn from a Google search and free resources and put something together on Teachable. And then I sent an email to them, look, now the presentation's online, and crickets. Nobody bought it. And I thought, well, I guess that's not the direction I'm going to go in. So I kept sort of slogging along for another couple of months. I'm like, man, the timer's counting down. And then I had a friend ask me if they could borrow my study materials for the licensing exam that art therapists have to take in New York. And I said, sure. And I thought, well, my study materials had done the rounds with my friends and colleagues. Like, why not just turn those into an online course? So I took all my study materials and then I put those on Teachable. And then I just advertised it to a few local listservs. And so more time goes by, a month or two goes by, and it's getting, I'm just like, man, I'm really struggling here financially. And I'm sick of where I'm working. I'm meeting with 3 clients a week in a yoga studio where I have to set up and break down after each hour because it's a rent by the hour office. And as an art therapist, like, you want a studio, you want an art studio to work with your clients. So an opportunity came up a block from where I was already working where an art studio was available. And it was $750 a month to occupy it for, I think it was like 2.5 days a week. And so I saw it, I loved it. I said, yes, I want it. And then I cried the whole way home because I'm like, I can barely afford my rent. I've only got like 6 months left to make this work. And I just agreed to pay for $750, which is 2/3 of my rent as it stands. And I also have to pay them a security deposit of $750. What am I thinking? So I wind up, so all this stuff is going on in the background. People are buying the online course for study materials. So that starts working. And this is kind of chugging in the background. And out of the blue, like 5 days before I'm supposed to sign the lease, and of course I'm conflict avoidant, so I'm twisted about it because I'm going to have to tell her, no, I can't sign the lease. A friend of mine, a mutual friend of me and my ex-husband's, sees a painting in his apartment and asks me if she can buy it. And so I'm like, she's like, how much do you want for it? And I'm like, $750. And so she's like, done. She bought my painting for $750. I had never sold a painting before in my life. Had plenty of paintings, never sold one. She buys it for $750. And I'm like, okay, I've got 5 days to get the security. I get the first month. That's security. What's the first month? So I did one thing I said I would never do, and I asked my mom for money. And she said what I always knew she would say, and that was no. But then the time comes along. And the reason I say that is because I think I opened something up, energetically speaking, just by doing the thing I never wanted to do and asking for help. My mom wasn't the one who showed up, but the universe ultimately did, because like a day before I'm supposed to sign that lease, the online school on Teachable paid out what I had earned for the study materials, and it was exactly $750. So I had first months and I had security. So I got into the art studio and I'm like, okay, I've got the 3 clients that I had picked up in the yoga studio. Now I've got a real art studio. I don't know how I'm going to make next month's rent for the office, let alone my home, but I believe it's going to happen. It's going to come. And it did. I did. I wound up building out my practice. And at the same time, the online stuff started growing and more people heard about my study materials and started buying them. And so my practice is growing and people are buying the online course. Nobody bought the credible character conflict course, but people were buying continuing education. So I was like, at that point I had been a therapist in practice for 6 or 7 years and I had a lot of like group curriculums, so group therapy curriculums. And I thought these are basically just online courses for other therapists. So I formatted them that way. And that winter, the winter after all this happened, New York State passed a law requiring therapists to have 36 hours of continuing education credit every 36 months, every 3 years. And man, they were pissed about it. Nobody wanted to do it. Nobody wanted to be regulated. And I was like, cha-ching. Mm-hmm. So I took all of my curriculums, turned them into continuing education courses. And by the time January rolled around, I was the only one ready and prepared to offer something. And there was a lot of demand. And so it was like, I've arrived, I've landed. And I was ready for this to happen. And there was no way I could have known that would have happened. So I was kind of off and running, and that was when I started shifting my focus from private practice to online, to the online space, and becoming more of an online educator. So I was doing a lot more like continuing education for licensed creative arts therapists and licensed mental health counselors in New York State. But then that went on for about a year or so, and then everyone catches on. So now my income starts going down again. And I'm like, there's got to be a better way to do this. And I don't need to just reach out direct to therapists. Why am I not just reaching out direct to clients? Like, why not just educate people about their own struggles? And I was kind of wobbling a little bit during that time because I had written a book about grief. That by that point, I then wrote a second book about attachment and working with the LGBTQAI community. I was working with people around addictions, so I didn't have a focus. It's just like, well, I'll just educate everybody about everything. But that was not really a scalable business model. And so I was plugging along and making these courses, and I was sort of in this place where I'm like, where do I go next? If I want to work with people directly, what am I going to offer them? What am I going to focus on? Who's my avatar? Right. And in the meantime, I'm also working on outdated computer equipment and I'm making these continuing education videos, but I know that my computer's going to die. So I'm like, there's got to be a way to save these things online. And someone suggested, well, why don't you just load them up to YouTube? And I knew nothing about YouTube at the time. I did realize that you could load your videos up to this online thing for free and they would store them. And I'm like, are they crazy? That's a terrible business model, but okay. So I loaded up my videos mostly about attachment. I was doing a course on attachment. And I didn't know you could privatize them. I didn't know you could make them unlisted. I didn't know anything. And I thought, who cares anyway? No one's paying attention to me. And so I loaded up all these videos about attachment and I walked away from it. And then I came back to it like 2 or 3 months later and I had 2,000 followers. And I was like, what? These were private. How did people see this? Without any effort from me. And I thought, that's another wink from the universe. I'm going to talk about attachment. And it kind of made sense because that standing ovation had been a presentation about credible character conflict and how attachment affects relationships. So I thought, oh, so I guess I'm going to talk about love after all. So I started talking about attachment and I just went full hog and focusing in on that. And I built my YouTube channel and I started doing it intentionally and things just grew. And over time, I just migrated entirely. I entirely migrated online in 2019, which was just before COVID in 2020. And then my business like tripled overnight. But each sort of turning point, I would say, I was set up for it. Like I've always been right where I need to be just before something happens beyond my control. So I feel like I've been guided in many ways, intuitively speaking.
Yeah, a couple of, as you said, winks from the universe there along the way, which is quite cool. All those different points where it was the pressure was building up, and then I mean, it's fascinating that you took your business online in 2019, right before COVID. Most people I speak to on this podcast, that sort of hit them and then they had to pivot and adjust to it. It sounds like you were just almost anticipated it was going to happen. So good for you. That's really great. So tell us today, how are the offerings that you're currently putting out there? Is all of your content still mainly focused around attachment? What are the offerings that you have, and how have they been over the last couple of years since COVID? As you said, your business tripled in that time. But have you noticed any changes since then? Where are things at today?
Yeah. So there are really kind of three sort of branches of things that I offer. The attachment courses is the largest one. So I have at this time, I believe I have six course offerings on my website for front facing traffic. People who get into my world, they get offers for other things along the way. But mostly those offerings are divided into the realms of communication. So how do we apply an understanding of your attachment style to how we utilize communication in relationships, understanding that communication is a vehicle for healing. So it's not just about negotiating our needs. It's also about how are we using our words to heal deep, profound emotional wounds that we carry. So I also tend to approach these things from within a spiritual perspective. So I believe that our relationships are containers for spiritual growth and expansion, whether we come together to catalyze our own spiritual growth, or we come together to create a container in which we grow together, right? So communication becomes a tool with which we are affecting that growth and expansion. The other category is just looking at spiritual healing on the level of inner child work. So looking at, because sometimes there's the level of attachment and security where if you can change a few things about the way you're communicating and the way you're showing up to the relationship, then the insecurity kind of eases and we're able to let it flow. There's usually more protective factors in a person's life if that's the case. If it's just taking a few tweaks and things work, then there were probably some considerable protective factors in that person's life. If we have someone who's experienced significant and severe trauma, the most secure, loving, ideal person could show up at their door. And now it's not a problem of arranging the environments, curating your environments to make good discerning choices. You've made the good choice. Now it is, you got to let it in. And this is where we have those internal barriers to embracing the abundances that we've, attracted in our lives, whether it is romantic, financial, physical, and health wise, all the categories. But in my case, I talk about this more through the lens of relationship. And so the spiritual healing courses are really for those folks who are like, I've got the love and I can't let it in. Or I struggle to believe I'm worthy of it without having to work hard for it. And so the working hard creates this distance between themselves and their intrinsic value. And that distance becomes mirrored in every subsequent relationship they have, where either they're keeping themselves apart from someone else or that person's keeping them apart. And so that distance gets mirrored in a variety of different ways and contexts. So those programs are really about closing that gap so that we recognize the transcendent love that exists within all of us. The other two sort of branches are, I still have my continuing ed school. So I still work with practitioners in New York State providing continuing education. And then I also now have offerings for other practitioners, therapists, coaches, and healers to start building their online offerings, let's say. So those are some things, those are really more like intimate projects. I usually get really close with those individuals because I want to pass on some of what I've learned so that other people in my space can evolve into this space. Because for therapists and practitioners, especially, there can be a culture of, there's this worthiness culture as well. Like, I feel like I can't charge for my services because what I'm offering is, a human service, and people should be entitled to my skills and to what I offer without having to pay for it. Right. But no one says that they're entitled to a surgery, and no one denies the salaries that doctors get. And yet we could argue that they are much more entitled to that because it means the difference between life and death. So why is it that we as therapists or practitioners feel that our work is devalued? And it's because it's connected to emotions. And, we have this societal, historical, patriarchal system that downplays emotions as being informative or productive or anything else. And so there's this thing that we've got inside of us where we're not advocating for our value or our worth. So this is a sort of third couple of offerings that I have for other practitioners in challenging those things. But my primary focus remains with attachment. And you asked me another question. Can you remind me?
Okay. I was just asking, the question I'd asked is also how your courses have evolved since COVID over the last couple of years as well.
Sure. So COVID, I don't mean to be flippant, but COVID was a boon for me because everyone was at home. Everyone was in tight quarters with their partners and they were driving each other crazy and they had nothing to do but go online. And so I had a course about how to deal with the person that's driving you crazy online. So, it really served my business well. It also created a massive acceleration in market sophistication, at least in terms of in the dating and relationship space. I mean, when I started, attachment styles was like a new idea. And literally within 3 years, everyone in casual conversation has at least heard of attachment styles and has a sense of what theirs might be, which is phenomenal. I mean, that is such a service to humanity. I can't even tell you. But as a marketer who's making her money off of teaching people about attachment styles, it means now you've got to find a new way of talking about it, and you have to stay relevant. And my revenues did go down. They went down considerably in 2022. I started to see that downward trend, and I was kind of in denial. And then at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, my revenues took a long leap off a short cliff. And so I was like, man. So I had to start looking at different platforms. Instagram exploded. Instagram exploded on the scene, especially with being able to automate engagement with ManyChat. Brilliant. And so I had been kind of ignoring Instagram. It was just sort of like the offshoot of things. And then I was mostly focusing on Facebook and YouTube. And then Facebook knocked me on my ass because they disabled my account with changes to their algorithm because the account said that I was violating their advertising policies because they have strict policies around things like mental health and stigmatizing people and so on and so forth, which is great. But the algorithm was very sensitive. And so I wasn't breaking any of those rules, but it thought I was. And so there were delays in getting my business up and running. And it just made me realize how reliant I was upon paid advertising in these outlets. And the same thing with YouTube. Google told me I couldn't retarget people anymore because I was violating advertising policies, but I wasn't. And so I kind of kept having to fight them and find someone to talk to fix it. And it just became cumbersome. So around 2023, September of 2023, I eliminated all paid advertising. And I was kind of right back to where I started. And I was like, in 9 months, if this business does not start working again, because I was paying 12 grand a month in paid advertising, and then I cut it all off. And I said, took out a couple loans. I'm going to ride this wave. And so I put my nose to the grindstone with organic traffic strategies with social media and search engine optimization. And by the time May rolled around, I was back to where I was, and I'm better without any paid advertising. So, and Instagram, I would say, was a huge part of that. I knuckled down on YouTube again. And a big part of that, too, was giving myself permission to talk about attachment in the way that I wanted to talk about it, which was through a spiritual lens. And I didn't want to talk about it in a psychological context anymore because personally, I've evolved out of that. And I also feel like because of the market sophistication out there, people know the psychological reasons. Now they're like, but what does it mean in the greater context of my life? So now I know what my attachment style is and I can see these patterns, but what do I do with that? What does that mean? How does that make meaning? How does it help me make meaning of my experience? And so that's kind of where I found the sweet spot. And that's where I'm really having a lot of fun hanging out right now.
That's awesome. That's such a really strong shift that you made, because I can imagine that was quite confronting, the, relying or basically getting to that point of just doing a lot of advertising, and I'm sure it served you quite well for quite a while, if you were spending that budget per month, and then getting to the point where, yeah, I understand the sensitivity from Meta and Google on their ad policies, particularly in your field. So it's not uncommon to hear these stories of accounts getting disabled and ads getting disrupted, which can be really stressful for a business owner, particularly if it is one of the channels that's working well for you. And it's always that feeling of like, hey, I'm trying to spend more money with you, Meta. Like, please let me spend more money on ads with you. And then sort of feeling like it's incredibly vague, and it's quite difficult to deal with their customer support as well. So it's really cool. I would love to understand, what did you do? You said you went back to the organic roots, but just like a little bit more specifically there on like, what did you start doing? Were you focusing on longer form content on YouTube? Did you start putting out more email content? What was your Instagram strategy? And also just on the end of that, what's working well for you at the moment in 2024 on the organic front?
Sure. So I guess I don't know if I may be making this term up or I may have pulled it from someone, but this concept of like domino content. So basically every month my strategy starts by writing 2 blog posts that are thoroughly researched in search engine keywords and search engine optimization. Then I take those and I reformat them into YouTube scripts. And then I'll search in YouTube for my competitors and to see what were the viral posts that my competitors put out, in the last month or so. And then I'll find a title or a topic that I think is close enough to what I have found connects to my scripts. And then I will make 4 video scripts per month based on those 2 blog posts. Then I'll pull clips from those videos for, shorts, whether it's on YouTube Shorts, Instagram, or TikTok. And then that's kind of like the foundation of the content I'll create. And then on top of that, I will look at varying the rhythm of the content by looking at trends. So in my niche, like therapist talking to client is a trend. Just
Hmm.
dancing with, slamming some text on the screen is kind of a trend. So in a week, I'll have talking clip with, fancy editing, therapist talking to client, me dancing with a catchy, text on the screen. And then on Instagram, carousels have been my highest performers by far. So I'll usually try to post at least one or two carousels per week. And then my stories just become an extension of whatever it is that I'm posting in terms of Instagram. The shorts will wind up on YouTube. So then the YouTube shorts direct people back to the videos that I created throughout the month. And I will say also, I'm very intentional with the way I structure my scripts. So my scripts are a lot more direct. So I'll start with obviously problem awareness. What are the myths you're believing about this problem? What's the truth? And here, let me show you the impact of changing your perspective. And I have a ton of video testimonials. So then at the end of my videos, I'll have a video testimonial and I'll explain how and why they got to that result. And if they want to get that result, here's where they can go to learn more. So I've been a lot more tight in the optimization of my funnels start to end on across all of my social platforms, including Instagram. Every carousel will end with a video testimonial and a call to where they can get the same result. And on Facebook is where I have my community. So I have a private Facebook community that's a free group that's got almost 30,000 people. And then the student Facebook community is much smaller. That's like a $3,000, 3,000 subscribers in that group. So Facebook kind of houses my communities at this time. I'm not really using it so much for advertising anymore, although I am planning on revisiting it. But I do have a page, and whatever I post to Instagram or to YouTube Shorts will wind up on that page. TikTok is honestly an afterthought, but
Hmm.
primarily because they don't automate engagement, and you have to always say check out the link in my bio. And I find that even though I can get more views faster on TikTok, I don't see the same level of engagement, and I don't see any sales coming in through TikTok. And I did investigate the options for setting up a TikTok shop, but it's really only for like products, like e-commerce. It does not lend
Hmm.
itself to informational products. Neither does YouTube, by the way. So I don't have a YouTube shop either. I just tell people to click the cards that you can insert in the videos. So for me, if I were to say, what is the platform that I'm mostly focused on right now, and considering that my offerings are informational products, Instagram is where it's at for sure.
Yeah, that's really cool. And how are you mentioned ManyChat there as a big part of your strategy as well.
Mhm.
Are you able to touch a little bit on what you're doing there? Are you sort of taking them through a long sequence after, or is it more just deliver the piece of content that they requested? How far does that go?
So I've experimented with a couple different strategies. We did have some automated sequences where people would opt into something. We'd wait a little while. Hey, did you like it? Or we'd wait to see if they clicked on it. Hey, notice you didn't click on it. Here it is again. And then triggering a conversation so that we can follow up in the conversation. And some of that worked, but I really just found that most of the people ignored it. So I'm usually using it in the simplest way possible. I'm just kind of in the mindset of simple is better. So basically, they'll do a keyword, we'll send them a link. And then when they click on that link, I just try to make sure that whatever they land on is optimized to the best possible way it can be for conversions, whatever that action is that they're taking. I use Instagram to drive people to YouTube. So, for example, if I know I did a really good video that ends with a video testimonial and a call to action, then on Instagram, I'll post a carousel, which I know will perform well. And then the key term will send them to ManyChat, which sends them to the video, which inspires them to buy my product.
Wow.
So there's a lot of cross pollination going on. So
Yeah.
the call to actions are not always click on the sales page. Sometimes it's like
Yep.
click on this thing I know you want. In my community, scripts are something that perform really high. as well, or like little quizzes, things like that,
Scripts?
and
What do you
video
mean?
and short.
What do you mean by those?
Yeah. So I teach people about communication. If people want help, like how do I break the silence with someone who's been stonewalling me? What
Mm.
are 5 texts I can send to someone who's during a no contact period, right? Um, how can I ask for space without offending my anxious partner? How can I ask for more connection without offending my avoidant partner? So those things perform really well on my platform. Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. And that's a lot of content that you're doing. If you can answer, roughly how long does that take you per week? How involved are you? Are you also doing all the editing for those? Have you got team members that are helping you on that? Would love to just understand a little bit more how much time and effort that takes you and how much you're also delegating as well.
Yeah. I'm really a one-woman show. I have a VA who assists me with my emails and issuing things like refunds. And she also does my books. And then I have another VA who answers people in our incoming messages on Instagram and on ManyChat. And we schedule the Facebook group content together. So she sort of manages that. And she will attend any live presentations I do. She attends to be a support person, and then she organizes, where all that's supposed to go. But other than that, I do all the SEO research, I do all the writing, I do all the editing, I do all the things, all the emails, all the
That's
above.
that's
Um,
amazing.
but yes, I have recently decided I would hire a couple people to help me with my YouTube editing. So I've got Abu and Safran working for me right now doing some YouTube editing. So we're giving it a trial run.
Cool. And where is ChatGPT fitting into your uh, content creation these days? Is it at all or
I'm sorry. There's three people I work with, and ChatGPT is the third.
yeah.
Um, it has 10x'd my productivity.
Yeah.
I could not be a one woman show without ChatGPT.
Yeah.
ChatGPT, I love you. Shout out. Um, yeah, and it's funny. Brock, I don't know if you are familiar. Brock Johnson's like a Instagram personality character, and
Yes.
he put out a prompt recently saying, "I didn't know ChatGPT could make me cry, but here we are." And it's a prompt where you basically ask ChatGPT to tell you about its impression of you and your strengths and whatnot. And so I typed this prompt in to ChatGPT, and it spit out the most heartfelt love letter to me. And I was like, this is scary and also wonderful.
Yeah.
But yes, to answer your question, it is an integral part of my business. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's incredible. Like every day or every week I'm just there's a new discovery with where it fits in and it just feels so nice sometimes to just
Yeah.
cut that 3 hour task down to 15 minutes. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's incredible. So I'm
Yeah.
glad to hear that it's yeah, you've got that third person on your team. So that's really really great to hear. Where you're at next? What's next on the plan for the business? Is there a particular new project that you're working on, or is it more of keep the content running, keep the existing offers running? What else was in the mix for you these days?
Yeah. So so like Mondays and Tuesdays, I call my consultation days. So those are days that I meet with clients privately who opt in to meet with me and speak with me one to one. So I'm kind of keeping that space because it keeps me honest and it also keeps me abreast of what people are going through. And then the second part of the week is usually doing all the things that it takes to create that much content on a regular basis. But I usually run live group coaching programs as well. So we're entering into a new cycle. We have an enrollment period now for a course for anxious attachment and healing the rescuer in love. But my passion is really the evergreen model, and just to have offers being shared asynchronously, and then usually I do 3 live launches a year. But my passion at the moment is I'm writing a book and I'm working with an editor. I've published 2 books, but they were really more textbooks and they were really geared to practitioners. And so now I'm really working on a book that is, I feel like, the culmination of the work that I've been doing in this space for the past 10 years. And it's going to be called Hungry Love. And it's going to be speaking about attachment from this new perspective that I've been enjoying working with. And just keeping our fingers crossed that it gets picked up. So that's where I'm at right now for new projects.
I'm sure it will. I'm sure there'll be a lovely wink from the universe at that next point for you. Can you talk a little bit more? Is it more on the, as you said, the attachment from a spiritual perspective? Is it more down that path? Like, feel free to share
Yeah,
a little bit
yeah.
more about it. Yeah.
Sure. So the book's going to be called Hungry Love, and it is 12 steps for overachievers to embrace soul-centered security in their lives using art therapy techniques.
Okay. Okay. So, how much is like so art therapy is still the main one-on-one therapy that you're doing at the moment, and
Mhm.
is that virtually or did you because I missed that part? Did you or it's all virtual at the moment?
Yeah, everything's virtual.
Okay.
Yeah, so art therapy is it's basically using your creative spirit to work with the issues that you're confronting. Because when we're talking, we're using a very particular part of the brain, and it's a part of the brain that is often highly defended. And a lot of times, people who struggle with insecure attachment use their intellect. At least and I work primarily with professionals and high achievers, and so they have adopted powerful strengths and coping skills that allowed them to succeed and thrive in their careers. But because those strengths stem from early attachment wounding, there's this perception that I've overcome that. It didn't affect me. But the energetic source of their strength still comes from that wound. And the pride that they feel about the strength coming from the wound keeps the wound in operation. And so a lot of the work that I do and a lot of what the book is about is recognizing when that's going on and how that's going on, recognizing the fear and the resistance we have to changing it because we're afraid it means we won't be successful and we're going to lose our identity if we do. So grieving that, letting go of that, surrendering that, and then realizing I don't need to lose my strengths. I don't need to change who I fundamentally am. I'm just going to source that from a different place. And I call that soul centered security, meaning you're sourcing it from the essence of your being. You're sourcing it from your spiritual self, the part of you that is informed by compassion, curiosity, creativity, cooperation, collaboration. The part of yourself that can look at your life from a moon's eye view and see and understand all the gifts that are inherent within it, even the wounds that you may carry. So this is really what the book is about. And that's kind of the nuance that we get into there. And that's why I call it soul centered security, because going back to what I mentioned before, like the perfect partner could show up at your door, but if you're not centered, you won't be able to let it in. And so if we can orient our sense of agency, esteem, worth, value towards the transcendent part of ourselves, then we can go into any situation and make discerning choices about it and feel more secure and understanding where we are in relationship to others.
Yeah, really cool. Really, really powerful message there. And hopefully that all continues to go really well for you. And yeah, as you said, on track to get published. Wish you the best for that. That's really, really cool work that you're doing. So, Brenna,
Thank
thank you
you.
so much for coming on and sharing everything about your personal journey, the business. Really, really interesting there. I love understanding a little bit more of that. Yeah, those tough moments that you face and how you pivoted and well, found the next, always adapting to those challenges that you faced. And you deserve all the success that you've got at the moment. So congratulations. And yeah, thanks for sharing everything with us today and being on the show. Appreciate
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's a fun conversation.
it.